In the summer of 1992, a 17-year-old girl named Emily Carter left her home in the quiet town of Arden Falls, Washington, for what was supposed to be a short solo hike. It was something she did often, part of her quiet routine. A way to escape the noise of daily life, clear her head, and disappear into the woods she loved so much. She told her parents she'd be back by dinner. She never returned. At first, there was no panic. Emily was independent, experienced, and familiar with the trails near Lake Rayner. But as the evening stretched on and the sun sank behind the hills, unease turned into dread. By nightfall, her parents were calling park rangers. By midnight, search teams were combing the forest. They searched for days. Volunteers, rescue dogs, helicopters. The small town rallied behind her family, lighting candles, organizing search parties, holding on to hope. But not a single piece of solid evidence turned up. No torn clothing, no broken gear, not even a footprint they could say for sure was hers. After 2 weeks, the official search was suspended. Emily's name quietly moved from the front page to the missing persons database. Life, cruelly and inevitably, moved on. Her family never stopped looking. Her mother left her bedroom untouched for years. Her father, once full of jokes and weekend plans, grew quiet. The woods that once felt peaceful now held a kind of menace, an unanswered question that no one could bring themselves to speak aloud. What happened to Emily? Years passed, then a decade, then 2. The world changed. New trails were carved, old ones overgrown. Emily's case became one of hundreds, another cold case folder collecting dust in a storage room. Until one day, 23 years later, a backpacker hiking deep in the Cascades veered off the main trail and came across something wedged beneath a moss-covered fallen tree. A small canvas bag, worn from decades of weather, stained by dirt and time. Inside, wrapped in brittle plastic and tied with fading red ribbon, was a diary, Emily's diary. What was written inside would shake her family, investigators, and everyone who remembered her name, because for over 2 decades, the truth had been out there, just a few hundred feet beyond where anyone had looked. Her words, preserved by the forest, would tell the story no one else could, not from police reports, not from press conferences, but from Emily herself. This is the story of a girl who vanished, and the diary she left behind, her final words, hidden beneath a tree, waiting to be found. Emily Carter wasn't the kind of teenager most people noticed right away. She didn't make waves in school. She wasn't the loudest in a room or the center of attention. But she had a quiet presence, the kind that lingered. She was observant, thoughtful, a little shy maybe, but always kind. Her teachers described her as bright but reserved. Her friends, few but loyal, said she was introspective and creative. She kept a sketchbook in her backpack and a diary tucked beneath her pillow. She lived with her parents, Susan and Daniel Carter, in Arden Falls, a small town nestled in the green, rainy spine of Washington state. The kind of town where everyone knows everyone else's name and what time they walk their dog. Arden Falls wasn't known for much. There was a single grocery store, a modest high school, and a small library where Emily spent most of her Saturdays. But what it lacked in size, it made up for in proximity to nature. Endless forests surrounded the town. Towering pines, moss-covered rocks, and winding hiking trails ran through the nearby Cascade Mountains like veins through muscle. Emily loved the outdoors. It was where she felt most herself. She wasn't athletic in the traditional sense. She didn't run track or play soccer, but she could walk for hours in the woods, lost in her thoughts, sometimes even talking to herself or reading poetry out loud. It was a habit her parents found quirky, even endearing. Nature was her escape. It was where she went when school felt overwhelming, when friendships got complicated, or when the noise of the world was just too loud. Saturday, July 18th, 1992, started like any other summer morning. The air was warm, the skies unusually clear, and the birds outside her window were already singing by the time she got out of bed. She had breakfast with her parents, toast, eggs, orange juice, then mentioned casually that she was heading out for a hike. Nothing unusual. She had done this dozens of times. She told her mom she'd be back by late afternoon. She packed a small canvas bag with a water bottle, trail mix, her favorite pen, and her red leather-bound diary. She slipped on her hiking boots, tossed on her brother's old mariner's cap, and left the house around 11 a.m. Her plan, according to a note she'd scribbled and left on the kitchen counter, was to hike the Twin Pines Loop, a moderately easy trail that began near the Lake Rainier trailhead and wound through a lush valley for about 6 miles. She'd done the loop before. It was safe, scenic, and popular among local hikers. But this time, she never came back. When 6 p.m. rolled around and there was no sign of Emily, her mom started to feel uneasy. At first, it was just the usual parental worry, traffic, maybe she lost track of time, but by 7:30, that unease turned into a gnawing fear. Susan called the ranger station, then the sheriff's office, and by 9 p.m., the search had officially begun. It started small, a few rangers, a couple of local volunteers, but by morning, over a dozen people were combing the Twin Pines Loop. By day 2, that number had tripled. Search dogs were brought in. Helicopters scanned the treetops. Locals from Arden Falls and nearby towns volunteered their time. The community mobilized in a way that only small towns can when one of their own goes missing. The woods were thick, humid, and full of natural distractions, fallen logs, steep inclines, and narrow ridge paths. But searchers were trained. They knew what to look for: footprints, broken branches, clothing, anything that might indicate someone had passed through. They found nothing, not a single confirmed clue. Every day the search expanded outward, wider and wider circles from where she was last believed to have been. The area was mapped, rechecked, and cross-referenced. Still nothing. The only possible lead came on the 3rd day. A volunteer reported seeing a single boot print near a narrow fork in the trail, one that wasn't marked on official maps. It looked fresh. It was the right size, but it was half washed out by rain the night before. There was no way to be sure. A little further from that same spot, a broken branch was discovered, snapped about 5.5 feet off the ground. Unusual height, possibly human, possibly nothing. Even more oddly, a plastic lens cap from a disposable Kodak camera was found near a dry creek bed. Searchers flagged it as potential evidence, but it didn't lead to anything more. No camera, no film, just a single dirty, sun-faded piece of plastic. Her parents held out hope. Every morning, Susan returned to the trailhead, watching the search teams go in and praying she'd see her daughter walking back out. She brought sandwiches and coffee for the volunteers. She refused to leave. Her husband, Daniel, drove into town to meet with the sheriff each day, demanding more resources, more air support, more coverage. But even he could see the cracks forming in the case. By day 12, media outlets had started to pack up. By day 14, the search was scaled back, and her disappearance was officially classified as a cold case. The town of Arden Falls changed after that. Not all at once, but noticeably. Doors stayed locked a little more often. Parents kept their children closer. People whispered in grocery store aisles, exchanged theories at church, and stared longer than they meant to at the Carters when they walked down the street. Everyone had an opinion. Some believed Emily got lost and succumbed to the elements. Others thought she might have run away, though no one could explain why she would leave without money, clothes, or saying goodbye. A few feared something darker, an abduction, an accident, or something even worse. But there was no evidence, no sign of struggle, no body, no witness, just silence. Her friends were devastated. At school, her empty desk remained untouched for weeks. Her locker, still decorated with stickers and notes, became a makeshift memorial. On the first day of the new school year, a candlelight vigil was held in the football field. Hundreds showed up. They held candles, sang songs, and read passages from her favorite book, The Secret Garden. Her English teacher cried through an entire reading. Susan and Daniel did what parents of missing children do. They refused to give up. They gave interviews, hired a private investigator, left flyers at rest stops and diners miles outside of town. Susan even went on a local news show, clutching a framed photo of Emily, asking anyone watching to call, even anonymously, if they knew anything. But months passed, then years. In 1995, Daniel collapsed at work and was hospitalized for a mild stroke. He recovered, but those close to the family said he was never quite the same afterward, more withdrawn, quieter. In 1999, on what would have been Emily's 25th birthday, Susan held a small memorial in the backyard, just close friends and family. She read aloud from one of Emily's early diary entries, something she had copied before the girl went missing. It said, "When I'm in the forest, I feel like I'm part of something much bigger, like the trees know me, like they're watching over me, and that makes me feel safe." It broke everyone's heart. Over the years, the case drew occasional attention from internet sleuths and cold case blogs. A few online forums picked it up. People analyzed old maps, posted theories, and debated every tiny clue the original investigation had found. There were dozens of theories. One person claimed she had been mistaken for a missing woman in Oregon. Another suggested she'd joined a secretive backwoods commune. And still others believed she had fallen into a ravine or had drowned in one of the many small lakes near the trail, her body hidden beneath the water. Nothing ever came of these leads. By 2010, most of the people who had searched for Emily had stopped talking about her. Her case file sat in a dusty cabinet at the county sheriff's office, marked inactive, pending new evidence. Her story became a ghost in the town's collective memory. Still there, but fading. But her mother never moved on. She kept the porch light on every night, even when the electricity bill doubled in the winter. She kept Emily's room just as it was, bed neatly made, books stacked in the corner, sketch pad still open to the last unfinished drawing, a tree, twisted and tall, growing out of a stone. Then, in the summer of 2015, 23 years after Emily disappeared, a solo backpacker named Natalie Green was hiking off-trail through a remote section of the Cascade Mountains when she stopped to rest beside a large, fallen tree. And, beneath that tree, she noticed something strange, a scrap of red fabric, a frayed strap, something buried just beneath the moss and earth. What she uncovered wasn't bones. It wasn't clothing. It was a canvas bag, water-stained, faded. Inside was a diary, and the name on the inside cover was written in fading black ink, Emily Carter. By the end of summer 1992, the trail that once felt so alive with hope had gone quiet. The Twin Pines Loop no longer echoed with search teams or calls of Emily's name. The signs were taken down, the volunteers went home, and the news crews moved on. But Emily's family stayed behind, emotionally, spiritually, and, for a while, physically. Her mother, Susan Carter, refused to accept what the officials were now gently calling a presumed fatal disappearance. To her, there was no body, no crime scene, no final answer. Emily wasn't gone. Emily was missing. That distinction, however small it seemed to others, meant everything. They kept the porch light on, left her room untouched. For months after the search ended, Susan took walks along the trail herself, hoping that maybe, somehow, she'd find the clue no one else had. But as autumn arrived and the days shortened, she began to understand the weight of what had happened. Emily was gone, and no one knew how or why. In the following year, there were occasional developments, but they always led nowhere. In March 1993, a pair of hunters reported seeing clothing deep in the woods. It turned out to be a torn poncho wrapped around a stump. In the summer, a hiker claimed to hear someone crying for help off-trail, but multiple searches turned up nothing. Theories swirled, and each one, no matter how implausible, gave the family just enough of a reason to hold on. One idea that gained traction among townspeople was the mountain man theory. Locals whispered about a reclusive man who supposedly lived deep in the forest, stealing food from campsites, avoiding contact with society, and possibly preying on the vulnerable. Rangers dismissed it as folklore. There were no confirmed sightings, no cabins, no evidence, just stories passed down from fire pit to fire pit. Another theory, quieter, more tragic, was that Emily had simply gotten lost, succumbed to exposure, and was still out there somewhere. Her body hidden by trees, buried under years of leaves and snow, never found because the forest had reclaimed her. For Susan, those years blurred together. One holiday after another came and went with an empty seat at the table. Her husband Daniel withdrew into himself. Once a loud and confident man, he began speaking less. His health started to decline. He developed insomnia, then migraines. By 1995, he was diagnosed with high blood pressure and depression. Still, Susan kept trying. She wrote to regional news stations, begging them to revisit Emily's case. Most never responded. The ones who did gave a polite apology. They'd moved on. The public's attention had shifted. There were newer stories, louder stories, and Emily faded further into the background. In 1996, 4 years after her disappearance, Susan received a phone call from a woman in Portland who claimed to have seen someone who looked exactly like Emily working in a local bookstore. The woman said she had the same eyes, the same nervous smile, and a small scar above her left eyebrow, just like Emily did. Susan and Daniel drove down that night. They didn't sleep. They didn't talk. They just drove. When they arrived, the girl was already gone. A manager said the employee had only worked for 2 days and hadn't returned. The security cameras had already been wiped. No name, no ID on file. It could have been her. Or it could have been someone who just looked a little too much like the girl they remembered. But the hope, and then the crushing disappointment, left Susan sick for days. By 1999, Emily had been gone for 7 years. Susan held a small memorial in the backyard on her daughter's 25th birthday. It wasn't a funeral. She never called it that. Just a gathering. Family and a few friends sat on folding chairs under string lights while she read aloud from one of Emily's old diary entries. In it, Emily had written, "Sometimes I feel like the trees are listening to me. Not in a creepy way, just like they care more than people do. When I talk out loud in the woods, I don't feel so crazy. I feel heard." By the end of the reading, everyone was in tears. After that, something changed. People stopped asking. Conversations became more guarded. Even well-meaning gestures, a neighbor bringing over old photos, a pastor offering a prayer, felt heavy. For the town, time had moved on. But for Susan, the clock had frozen in July of 1992. Daniel passed away in 2007 from complications related to a stroke. He died quietly, in a hospital bed, without ever knowing what happened to his daughter. Susan said later that he'd spent his final years rereading old journal entries and newspaper clippings, convinced the answer had always been just out of reach. Emily's case remained open but inactive. It had long since been moved from the active investigation pile to a cabinet marked archived. Every couple of years, a new rookie detective would inherit the files, glance through them, make a few calls, and inevitably give up. Without new evidence, there was nothing to pursue. Then came the Internet. In the early 2010s, Emily's name began to reappear in places no one expected. Reddit threads, missing person forums, cold case YouTube channels. Strangers who had never met her, never even set foot in Washington, were now discussing her case, mapping her last known location using satellite images, cross-referencing ranger logs, and speculating on everything from foul play to animal attacks to secret disappearances. One user even uploaded a 3D reconstruction of the Twin Pines Trail using archival USGS maps and drone imagery. Others suggested possible off-trail routes she may have taken, including a narrow, lesser-known branch that had been overgrown for decades. None of it brought answers, but it stirred something back to life. Then came 2015. On July 22nd, just days after the 23rd anniversary of Emily's disappearance, a 27-year-old solo backpacker named Natalie Green set out on a multi-day trek through a lesser-traveled section of the Cascade Mountains. Natalie was experienced, confident, and loved exploring unmarked paths. That day, she decided to veer off the established loop and explore a ridge just west of the main trail system. She was about 8 miles from any ranger-marked point when she came across a strange mound near a fallen, half-rotted pine tree. The area was quiet, covered in moss, and felt untouched. She noticed something odd, a frayed piece of red canvas peeking out from the earth, not natural. She cleared away the dirt, digging slowly with a stick and her hands. What she found was a small, weathered backpack, zipped shut, mud-caked, stiff from time and moisture. Inside, carefully wrapped in brittle, crumbling plastic, was a red leather-bound book, a diary. On the inside cover, in faded ink and slightly smudged handwriting, were the words, "Property of Emily Carter, July 1992. Natalie froze. She didn't know the story. She didn't know the name, but something about the book, and the obvious age of it, unsettled her. She turned it over to the nearest ranger station the next morning. Within 48 hours, the story was everywhere. DNA tests on items in the bag confirmed it belonged to Emily. Rangers verified the location and cross-referenced it with the original 1992 search maps. That area had never been searched. Not once. It was roughly 300 feet from the trail fork where the boot print had once been found. Close enough to touch. But somehow it had been missed. The diary was still intact. Miraculously, despite water damage to the outer pages, the interior was mostly legible. Written in her handwriting, it documented Emily's final days. She had gotten lost, tried to loop back, then fell and injured her ankle. She had limited supplies, no way to signal help. She survived, not for hours, but for days. Possibly over a week. Her final entry was dated July 26th, 8 days after she disappeared. The last page simply read, "If anyone finds this, please tell my mom I tried. I really tried. I just wanted to see something new. I didn't mean to get lost. I thought they'd find me. I just want to go home." In those lines, Emily's voice returned after 23 years of silence, and with it, the haunting truth. She had been there all along, not far, not hidden by some elaborate crime, just missed, by chance, by timing, by the tiniest margin. The forest had kept her secret, until it didn't. The diary surfaced quietly at first, handed in at a ranger station by a backpacker who didn't even know the name Emily Carter, just a hiker, handing over something strange she'd found in the woods. But by the next day, everything changed. Within hours of receiving the bag, a ranger recognized the name. He didn't have to Google it. He was 10 years old when Emily disappeared. Her photo had been tacked to a bulletin board in his elementary school hallway for months. Now, more than 2 decades later, the name was back, handwritten inside the cover of a red leather journal, preserved inside a bag buried beneath a tree. The ranger called it in immediately. By that evening, the county sheriff's department had confirmed the discovery. The bag, canvas, faded, torn at the edges, contained the unmistakable handwriting of a girl who hadn't been seen since July 1992. DNA testing was rushed. Fibers from the bag matched samples in Emily's old clothing. The pen inside the bag matched the same ink used in her school notebooks, but no one needed tests to believe what they were seeing. The handwriting, the tone, the rawness. It was her. The diary was real. And for the first time in 23 years, there were answers. Emily had survived the first night, and the second, and the third. Her entries began on the afternoon of July 18th. At first, they were calm, reflective, even hopeful. Tried a new trail. Ridge split near the old pine. It's beautiful here. Never seen this part before. Everything's glowing. Moss on the rocks, sun coming through the leaves. I'm going to stop and sketch before heading back. She didn't make it back. Okay. Update. I think I took a wrong turn. I kept thinking I'd loop back, but now I'm not sure. The sun is setting faster than I thought. Should have started earlier. Day 1 ended with uncertainty, but not fear. Day 2 was different. Didn't sleep, kept hearing things. Might have been animals. I think I'm going in circles. The trees all look the same. Should have marked something. I've only got a little water left. I miss Mom. I miss Dad. I know they're looking for me. I hope they are. She was injured on day 3. She fell, possibly off a slick rock face or down a hidden slope. Her writing became shakier. I twisted my ankle. It hurts like hell. Can barely walk. Sat under a tree all day. Can't stop crying. By day 4, her entries began to stretch into longer monologues. She questioned herself. She apologized. She began to accept the situation. I know I messed up. I thought I knew the trail. I didn't tell anyone I was going off the main path. I didn't mean to scare anyone. I thought I'd be back before lunch. The nights are the worst, cold and loud. I keep thinking I hear someone calling, but I know it's in my head. What's striking isn't just the physical details, it's the emotional unraveling. By day 6, the entries shift tone again. They're softer, slower. Her sentences start to trail off. Dreamt about school, about the lake. I miss warm food. I miss real shoes. I don't know what I'm waiting for. I think maybe they've stopped looking, or maybe I just can't hear them. This tree is my friend now. I talk to it, not out loud, just in my head. And then, the final page. If someone finds this, please tell my mom I tried. I really did. I wasn't trying to disappear. I wanted to be brave. I thought I was. But I'm tired now. I'm so tired. Please tell her I love her. There were no more entries after that. Investigators believe she likely died of dehydration and hypothermia within the following 24 to 48 hours. She had survived for at least 8 days, maybe longer, just over a week, alone, cold, waiting. When news broke that the diary had been found, the response was immediate. Emily's name trended online for the first time. Articles were written, old classmates came forward with memories, photographs resurfaced of her at birthday parties, school dances, sitting beneath a tree with a sketch pad in her lap. It was a ghost coming back to life. Susan Carter was contacted before the public announcement. When detectives showed her the diary, she reportedly held it in her hands for nearly an hour before opening it. She said she recognized the handwriting instantly. She didn't cry at first. She just held it, as if it were her daughter's hand. 3 days later, a new search team was dispatched, not to look for a missing girl this time, but to find her final resting place. Natalie, the backpacker who had found the diary, returned to guide them back to the exact location. The coordinates were remote, 8 miles off the main trail system, near an old, unmapped fork hidden beneath decades of overgrowth. It wasn't on any modern park map, but it matched the area Emily had described in her early entries, about 300 feet from where the diary had been buried beneath the tree. Searchers found something else, a shallow pile of stones, man-made, carefully arranged. Beneath them, partial skeletal remains, tattered clothing, the mariner's cap, a rusted metal zipper, the remnants of a water bottle. DNA confirmed what they already knew. Emily Carter had finally been found. What happened next was something few could have predicted. The story exploded. Media outlets ran retrospectives, national morning shows covered the rediscovery, true crime podcasts released episodes within days. But unlike so many unsolved tragedies, this wasn't a story about violence or murder or malice. This was about something far more devastating in its simplicity. A girl who got lost, a girl who tried to survive, and a world that just missed her. Authorities faced immediate questions. How had the 1992 search failed to cover the area where she was found? How had cadaver dogs, aerial teams, and dozens of volunteers missed her? The answer was a bitter one. The location where Emily was ultimately found sat just beyond the original grid assigned to searchers. In 1992, without GPS tracking, search maps were hand-drawn and based on best estimates. The ridge she had wandered onto wasn't part of the mapped trail system at the time, and once the initial days passed, weather, foliage, and terrain had erased the clues that may have led to her. Just a few 100 feet off the search perimeter, that's all it took. The diary became a central piece of the case file, not for prosecution, but preservation. A forensic team preserved each page digitally. Select entries were released to the public with Susan's blessing. One was printed in full in the Seattle Times. Another was read aloud at a memorial ceremony held in Arden Falls 2 months later. Hundreds of people attended. Many had never known Emily personally, but they came anyway, drawn by the intimacy of her words, the pain of her solitude, and the heartbreaking realization that she had been so close to rescue, yet so far from help. Susan Carter spoke last that day. She said, "My daughter didn't die a mystery. She didn't vanish into nothing. She left her truth in those pages, and I will be forever grateful that I got to read her words, that I got to hear her voice one more time. We spent 23 years looking for her, and she was right there, waiting, hoping, writing, trying to get home." In the months that followed, a memorial bench was installed near the trailhead, inscribed with Emily's name and a line from her final diary entry. "Please tell my mom I tried." Park rangers created a new trail map that now marks Carter's Ridge in her memory. Hikers are reminded of her story when they pass through, a sobering reminder of how fast the wilderness can turn against you and how human stories can be hidden just beyond the trees. The backpacker, Natalie Green, was invited to speak at a small ceremony the following spring. She declined most interviews, but agreed to meet Susan privately. The two reportedly sat in silence for nearly an hour before saying anything. When they did, there were no questions, just quiet gratitude. 2 lives touched by the same forest, one taken, the other changed forever. Years later, Emily's story is still told, not as a warning, though it serves as one, but as a testament to resilience, to presence, to the small, invisible threads that connect lives across time and space. In the end, Emily Carter didn't die forgotten in the forest. She lived in it, she fought, she wrote, she left a record of her heart, one that endured storms, snow, time, and loss. A diary buried beneath a tree, a girl hidden by the forest, a story finally told. Emily Carter's return, even if it was only her words and remains, felt like a crack in time opening, letting light into a place where darkness had sat for more than 2 decades. For Susan Carter, it was a kind of closure most families never get. But closure didn't mean peace. It didn't erase the 23 years she had spent sleeping with the porch light on. It didn't undo the days spent staring at an empty chair, or the sound of her husband's footsteps that had stopped one summer morning and never returned. But it gave her a final page, a closing sentence, and that mattered. In the weeks after Emily's remains were recovered and confirmed, Susan brought her daughter home. Not in the way she had dreamed for years, not walking through the front door with muddy boots and a soft apology, but in an urn resting on the mantel beside a photo of her smiling in the woods, aged 17 forever. Emily was laid to rest in a small cemetery just outside Arden Falls. A simple plaque marks the grave. Emily June Carter, 1975 to 1992. She tried. At the funeral, Susan didn't speak much. She sat between two lifelong friends, her hands tightly folded, the diary resting on her lap like a fragile artifact. She had read it in full by then, every entry, every line, and she had read it aloud to herself, again and again, hearing her daughter's voice return through her own. Friends from high school came, some with children of their own now, old teachers, former searchers, even the ranger who had taken Natalie Green's report that day at the station. They all came to say goodbye to a girl they hadn't seen in decades, but who now, through her words, felt closer than ever. In the town of Arden Falls, Emily's story became more than just a tragedy. It became a symbol, a legacy. Local schools began teaching outdoor safety and wilderness navigation as part of their curriculum, not just theory, but personal responsibility. Her case was used in training materials for new search and rescue volunteers statewide. Lessons were drawn from it, the need for expanded perimeters, for better mapping, for patience in searches that span longer than expected. But it wasn't just procedure that changed, it was perspective. Emily had been missing in plain sight. Just beyond the reach of helicopters, dogs, and desperate footsteps, her presence hadn't been erased, only overlooked. That truth haunted people. And not just in Arden Falls. Her diary was published, in part, in a book compiled by her mother titled The Tree is Listening. It wasn't a bestseller, it wasn't meant to be, but for those who found it, it was unforgettable. A slender volume of entries and reflections, photographs and timelines, with every page soaked in a sense of quiet grief and impossible strength. One reviewer wrote, "Emily Carter did not die in vain. She documented the slow unraveling of time, the crushing weight of silence, and the unfathomable power of hope. Her words are not a scream, they're a whisper, and somehow that makes them louder." As for Natalie Green, the backpacker who found the diary, she retreated from the spotlight. Offers came in, news appearances, documentary deals, podcast interviews. She declined almost all of them. She didn't want to be famous for finding something that should have been found long ago. But she did meet Susan privately and later wrote a short essay published anonymously in a hiking journal. In it, she said, "That tree, the one I found the bag under, it wasn't remarkable, not taller, not older, not special, but somehow it had guarded that diary like a secret, and when I pulled it out, I felt like I had touched someone's last breath." She never returned to that trail again. Time, as it does, moved on, but not without marks. A memorial bench was placed at the entrance to the now renamed Carter Ridge Trail. It overlooks a small clearing, the same area searchers once gathered before heading into the woods. The inscription reads, "For the ones still out there, for the ones we find too late, for the voices that stay even after the footsteps fade." Every spring, a few visitors leave notes, flowers, or copies of The Tree is Listening. Some sit in silence for a few minutes. Some cry. Others speak softly as if addressing someone invisible. And maybe they are. Local students sometimes take field trips there, and each time the ranger retells the story, not to scare them, but to remind them what happens when we assume the forest is just trees, that every trail carries a history, every branch a chance. Emily's story doesn't have villains. There was no killer, no abductor, no twist of malice, but that makes it more painful in some ways, because it was real. Just a girl, caught between adventure and accident, confidence and consequence, and a world that moved on faster than she did. In the years that followed, Emily became a kind of symbol, not sensationalized, not commercialized, but humanized. Artists painted portraits based on her diary descriptions. A high school theater group in Spokane adapted the entries into a one-act play. A local folk band wrote a song titled 8 Days about holding on, calling out, and the sound of wind through trees that never answers. It wasn't just grief that inspired people. It was the intimacy of her words, the quiet bravery in the face of something most adults can't comprehend, the slow realization that help isn't coming, and the choice to write rather than collapse into silence. Emily didn't scream into the void. She spoke, page by page, hoping someone would listen. Eventually, someone did. For Susan, grief became something softer over time, not lighter, it never got lighter, but more familiar. She said in a later interview, "I spent 23 years imagining her terrified, alone, begging for someone to find her. And yes, she was scared. But she wasn't just that. She was strong. She was still writing, still thinking, still being herself. That's what I hold on to. She didn't disappear. She waited, and we heard her." Each anniversary was marked quietly. A candle, a letter, a visit to the bench. Sometimes Susan would read aloud one of Emily's entries to the wind, believing that maybe, just maybe, the forest was still listening. Emily Carter's story may not be unique in its loss. Thousands disappear every year. But what made hers linger was that she was never truly gone. Her voice remained, preserved in ink, protected by bark and soil, a time capsule of emotion, one that once opened touched everyone who heard it. The diary was never placed in a museum or turned into spectacle. Susan kept it. She said she might one day donate it to a library or university. But for now it stays in a wooden box wrapped in cloth next to her daughter's photos and sketches. It isn't a relic. It's a conversation. So what do we take from this? We take the reminder that some stories are quiet, that not every tragedy comes with sirens or villains, that sometimes the most powerful voice is the one that isn't screaming, but simply hoping. We take the lesson that hope is not foolish, that trying, even in the face of no rescue, is a kind of bravery we rarely recognize, and we remember that sometimes the thing we're searching for isn't gone, it's just waiting to be seen. Emily June Carter left behind no monument, no fame, no viral twist, just a red canvas bag, a diary, and a story that waited patiently beneath a tree, hoping one day to be heard. And now it has been. Some stories end in justice, others in mystery. But Emily Carter's story ends in something quieter, understanding. For 23 years, she was a question mark, a name on a flyer, a photo on a bulletin board, slowly fading under the weight of time. And then, all at once, she was a voice again. A voice that had never really been gone, just buried beneath moss, bark, silence, and years. Her diary didn't solve a crime. It didn't point fingers. It simply told the truth of a girl who tried to find her way back, who waited, who hoped, and who faced her final days with a kind of courage most of us will never understand. She didn't rage. She didn't panic. She wrote. She left behind more than pages. She left behind a reminder that even in the quietest corners of the world, someone is still listening, that even the softest voice can echo across decades, that even when no one's looking, someone is still worth being found. There's something haunting about the fact that she was so close, just beyond the search grid, just past the place the dogs stopped sniffing, a few hundred feet. That's all that separated silence from discovery. And yet, in that small space, a world of meaning lived. Emily's story isn't about failure. It's about endurance. It's about how sometimes the forest doesn't forget, and how, eventually, if we listen carefully enough, the truth finds its way home. If this story moved you, if her voice reached you, take a moment, not just to reflect, but to remember, to carry her words forward, to look a little closer next time, to call out, not just for the ones you've lost, but for those who might still be waiting to be heard. Because somewhere out there, another voice is still writing, still hoping, still trying.